Okay, comrades, welcome to the first afternoon session of Communist University today. The title of this session is called How Do We Take the Project of a Communist Party Forward? As comrades can see, we've got two speakers and the top table. I'm sure most of you, many of you, if not all of you, know Cap Rylance, who was representing Prometheus during the communist fusion process. But I'd also like to introduce Joe Carman. Joe is a representative of the Executive Committee of the Marxist Unity Caucus. So they'll be speaking for about 20-25 minutes each, and then the usual format is for questions and discussions. So with no further ado, I'll pass you over to Joe to start.
Cheers. So I'll just briefly kind of explain what the Marxist Unity Caucus is. So we're a faction of revolutionary socialism in the 21st century, which was one of these groups that spun out of the SWP in the aftermath of the 2013 crisis. And we got started about a year ago, kind of, and have formed ourselves more publicly and have grown, I'd say, had some fairly positive effects on rs21 as an organisation. And so this has been kind of framed as a bit of a debate about kind of what do we do if we want to achieve a communist party, which everyone in this room surely does. I'm not going to speak to kind of specific successes or failures of forging communist unity process or of Marxist Unity Caucus. I wasn't involved in the FCU, so I can't speak to it. But I'll just kind of get started, right? So our aim, so when I was looking at this question, the thing that came to mind for me was, what is our aim? Okay, so what are we trying to do? So we want a democratic centralist party, unites all Marxists who are disloyal to the constitutional order behind a democratically agreed programme. It should have democratic republican structures and cultures. It should develop freedom of dissent and good political education within it. It should be ideally part of an international organisation that is capable of challenging power on an international scale and is ultimately capable of building up that state within a state that's necessary for us to be able to challenge for power in the long run. So when we're thinking then about how we get there, for me, one of the main things is what are the actual barriers to us getting there, right? So we know we want to get there. We know that we have to a certain extent, go through the existing left, right? We can't pretend that they don't exist and go to the class. Because that just ends up making another sect and it just doesn't work, just collapses. And the way I've kind of started thinking about it is that what we have to really do is break apart the common sense of British left, right? The common sense of the British left, these are things like appearing legitimate to the bourgeois order, trying to seek unity with trade union tops and MPs and councillors and prominent independent people because they're good on this issue or that issue. I think one of the really big ones is this not in front of the children approach to political disagreement, where it's all kind of hidden away. And there's other things as well. So, not wanting to be in a political minority and not wanting to accept those within your organisation. Things like that Harry Holmes in Prometheus identified as the network left. And this is a particular kind of way of approaching organising that has become quite prominent in the last 10-15 years or so, that kind of treats organising as a thing we do and kind of excludes other people. It's often very horizontalist, but what that actually means is that you don't have any structures and you end up with this tyranny of structurelessness and the loudest voice wins out. Also things like labourism, so focused on stabilising capitalism, trade union bureaucracy, having a voice and wanting to maintain those positions. Focusing on demands for the here and now and sort of the long-term project. And then things like sect patriotism, this idea that my sect is the least bad sect, so we'll all be fine if we all just get with me. And we have to break these ideas apart, right? They don't work. They have been the common sense on the British left for decades. We have to show that they are ineffective. And my argument is that we have to, in its place, construct a new common sense that is democratic republican, internationalist, revolutionary communist, and pushes towards the kind of party we want to see. That will be really hard. That's going to be very, very hard because the existing common sense sustains the careers, social lives, intellectual worlds of the vast majority of the organised left, right? And actually a good chunk of the disorganised left as well. This is the way things are done. We all do things we all go to the protest. And if you want to be more involved, you get involved with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign by being mates with a person. And then you move up through those cycles, or you go to your trade union branch and you affiliate to this. And it's all very kind of, it's stuck in this method that has not worked and hasn't worked quite obviously for 40 years as we get smaller and weaker. And what I kind of think we need to replace it is, we need to build this new common sense. And the way I think we do that is with what I kind of am beginning to call this kind of partyist strategy of patience. So understanding that this is a generational project, right? Reshaping the left and reshaping the common sense of the left is not something that will happen tomorrow. It might have a very quick, there might be a point where it suddenly changes, but the actual groundwork will take years. It will take a very long time because, again, the existing common sense is so baked in to the way that the left organizes in this country. We are going to fail, though, if we limit ourselves to simply saying it's wrong. So if we just sit and write articles that only we read that say, look how terrible it is, that's not going to work. No one's going to engage with it. We have to engage with the left as it exists. And the point that I kind of want to make today throughout this talk is that we want to demonstrate that our common sense is better than the existing common sense, that the ideas we hold about organisation are better than the ideas that the existing left holds about organisation. Our politics, our view of organising, it's democratic, Republican, genuinely communist, is effective, right? When we do it properly, it's effective and it's capable of being genuinely popular and sustainable, and it can win over the existing left because it is better than the existing left. That's what drew me to it, right? Was the idea that this was better. We must have the confidence of our convictions and organise openly as partyists, as partisans of Marxist unity wherever we are. So if you are an independent communist, then that means finding people to work with. If you're in an organised group, it means fighting for Marxist unity within that group. If you're just an activist in your union, it's about fighting for those principles within your union. And that means as well, fighting for those things in this new left party under Corbyn, whatever that looks like, whatever stupid name they end up giving it, that we need to be in there and fighting for it, because there will be hundreds or thousands of people who are somewhat sympathetic to our views who can be won over. And we can't approach it by going like, well, you know, it's also got Jeremy Corbyn or Shokat Adam or any of these people who have like actually fairly terrible views on different things. We can't go like, well, they're in it, so we can't be. We can't take that sectarian approach. And again, I just want to emphasize this is going to take a very long time, probably. Like, it will not be fixed tomorrow. And we have to be ready to be in it for the long haul. So for me, the inspiration that I draw on is the Marxist Unity Group in the US, right? These are, from my perspective, the most successful partyist organization of the last century in the English-speaking world. I don't know the rest of the world as well. But from them, we should take this clear commitment to politics and political education, right? That our organization should be like the Marxist Unity Group. They should be partyist in form, not simply in politics, right? Mug put forward absolutely excellent politics, but the thing that makes them work is that they have a very clear partyist organizational form and organizational culture that allows them to develop their cadre into being proper representatives of their class and advocates for a real communist strategy within DSA, and has allowed them to grow from an organization that in 2021 sent, I think, 3 or 4 people to the DSA convention, to now an organization that sends hundreds, and an organization that is on a scale that is like really quite remarkable if you look at where they started from this decade. Like, we're talking within the 2020s, that transformation is remarkable. And it is because partyism is effective politics. Partyist organization works because it raises the level of understanding of the membership. It improves the organizers that you have, because it doesn't treat organizing as a thing that's done by full-timers with no input from anyone else. So yeah, this is the point I kind of keep returning to, is the ideas that the existing left hold about organising in politics have the consequence of disorganising them and weakening their political understanding. This is a point that I got from Mike McNair before, that I've heard him make. And it's a really important point. And it was something that I found really kind of fundamental, is that if you're engaged in these ideas that we shouldn't ever talk about our politics, then you end up having a worse understanding of politics, quite obviously. Our ideas about organising should allow us to out-organise these comrades, right? Because we hold better ideas. We think we should have these debates and discussions in the open. So we should prove that they're wrong. It's insufficient to be like, our idea is better and then shrink as an organisation. That's not going to work. People are just going to go, yeah, but you might have better ideas that might logically work, but the SWP have gained members and you've lost them. And we can say that's a really flawed way of analysing it, and it is. But if you're just a random person who's first getting introduced into socialist politics, that seems more compelling, right? That an organisation growing and doing things, even if they are just running around like blue-ass flies doing whatever, it feels more worthwhile. And it's something we have to challenge, and we have to prove that we're better at, and we have to prove that our organisation is worthwhile. So from my view, one of the key things that's worked for the Marxist Unity Group is that they put forward these 7 principles that they fight on in the Democratic Socialists of America. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I think we need to kind of fight on similar things within the British left. So the first one for me is kind of organising for democracy. So in our organisations, we need to fight for them to be democratic in form. We need to fight for the right to recall our elected officials, to make sure that any full-timers are elected by the membership. And when I say in our organisations, I do mean our unions, but I also mean our political organisations, our Marxist sects and Marxist groups and this new left party. We need to fight for democratic structures in this party. Things like term limits, right? We should not be in the case of having people sitting in leadership positions for decade upon decade, because it weakens the organization, because you're not training new people up. I think as well, the next point I'd make is that uniting behind a program, right? And the big part of that is taking politics seriously and talking openly and seriously about the politics that we hold, not just getting behind the lowest common denominator of, well, we wouldn't want to scare anyone, so let's just say we want the NHS to still exist and isn't war bad, right? We need something more substantial than that, and we need to discuss it in public. We need to stay committed to the ultimate aim here. Again, that thing I said at the start, a mass communist party that is capable of challenging for power. Things around, in order to get there, I think key political demands need to focus on things like democratic republicanism. We've seen in recent weeks, in recent months, the absolutely terrible attacks on democratic structures in this country, on democratic rights and freedoms that have been taken for granted for a very long time, but had been undermined. But the attacks that have taken place against supporters of Palestine Action are really worrying, and we need to challenge them. And the communist movement is very well placed to challenge them because we have a clear alternative if we are willing to put it forward. I think as well, with the context of the Ukraine war, fighting the main enemy at home, right, in the words of Liebknecht, and making clear that we are opposed to any escalation in international conflict, that we stand for, in Lenin's terms, turning the imperialist war into a civil war. We are for British defeat. We have to be for British defeat. And then finally, no compromise with chauvinism, none at all, right? The working class is multifaceted, its experience isn't uniform. We have to challenge anybody that calls for selling out of this or that section of the working class in the name of power. Right, we cannot say, oh, well, we want a left-wing exit from the European Union and sod the French and German workers will be fine. We cannot similarly say we want, a left-wing politics, but we're just not going to talk about gay people because we want to win over this or that section. It's a totally flawed approach, and it ends up weakening our politics in the long run. I'll move now on to kind of what we should do practically. So when I first wrote this 2 weeks ago, it wasn't clear that the broad left party thing was going to come about, and then I had to rewrite the entire second half of it because it gained 600,000 people signed up to a mailing list, and so it's becoming clear something is happening. And really, what we've seen is that people want an alternative. There is a clear appetite for a political alternative. Everything is clearly fucked. We need to have some kind of alternative, and the left is well placed to make that argument. We have to be in this party because this party, and when I say we, I say all of those committed to having a genuine democratic multi-tendency communist party need to be in this new party, because it is where the people that will staff that new party, that will be its members, are. It's where they're going to be. People that are serious about politics are going to join this party. So what I think we should do is we should, and this is something that we've kind of argued for in rs21 and is kind of clear, it is becoming part of our approach to it, which is we should try to have an explicit caucus committed to specific politics within this New Left Party. So a faction, whatever you want to call it, that fights for for democratic rights, for democratic republicanism, for no compromise with chauvinism, for a communist horizon. All of those things need to be fought for in this New Left Party, and we need to be in there fighting for them. We will probably lose, to be crystal clear. Like I don't think we're going to win on most of these, especially immediately. And we cannot go like, well, you know, they've not committed to communism, so we're checking out now. All right, that's not gonna hold water, and it'll just leave us isolated, talking to ourselves in another small conference room, and that's not enough. That's just not enough for the situation that we are facing. I think here, as we move into this new broad left party, I think the Marxist Unity Group will be massively instructive, right? They have worked in the DSA, which has had some people with incredibly poisonous politics within it, and they've managed to build themselves into a real force within it. So we need to look at them. One of the main things they do that have managed to do is comprehensive and effective political education, right? And being very clear about that. The blue book that they developed was excellent. There's another really good piece that got passed around a while back, which was written shortly before the Marxist Unity Group was founded by a Canadian comrade about their experience in the Canadian New Democrats, and what you should do as socialists. And but some of the points that I pulled out of that I thought were really excellent is we need to go in with if there are formal rules of this organization, which who knows if there are going to be, but if there are, we need a comprehensive understanding of them, because the right are going to have a comprehensive understanding of them. We need to be able to challenge them on the letter of the rules, even if we think these rules are kind of weighted against us. We have to be able to challenge them on it. We need to tie that with clear politics, presenting an alternative. The points I made before about democratic republicanism, about no compromise with chauvinism, a communist horizon. We have to also tie that in with becoming effective political communicators, becoming people that in a conference hall can win around the waverers, can win people over to actually, no, yeah, we do need to vote for this because this is a meaningful socialist commitment. We have to do all of those things, because if we don't do those things, we end up isolated, we end up on our own. So I think that's really instructive, that thing of having a good understanding of the rules, but also presenting a clear political alternative and having a really effective approach to communication. So once established, once we've built this kind of faction, we're probably going to lose. I've said that before. We're going to lose battles initially, but we can't use that as an excuse to disengage or retreat or abandon our politics. However, we shouldn't go, and this is kind of a personal view, but I don't think we should go in and immediately start a fight on a question about like the transition from socialism to communism, because I don't think that's an effective place to have that fight. In a different room, it's an effective place to have that fight. But in this organization, I think the effective place to start that fight is on questions of democracy, questions of program, right? Starting there. Of course, we remain committed. Of course, we say openly, yes, we are committed to a particular view of we want socialism and we want communism. We say that explicitly. But I would say we need to focus our energy, our time on fighting on things that will allow us to win in the long run. And if we win and fight on the democracy of this organization, that is what will allow us to win in the long run. The other point I've forgotten about there was programmatic unity. So about even if the program, if we are able to win in this organization, that being a member of this organization means that you agree with the program and that you and you pay the dues and you turn up to meetings. If we're able to win that, the actual content of the program at the time that we win that is much less important, right? Because then we can fight on the point that this is the program, it's decided by the membership, and we want to change it because we represent a significant chunk of the membership. If we lose the fight over program initially, that's then much harder. I'm not saying that means we should disengage or anything, but those have to be starting points because they allow you to more effectively fight on your politics later on, I think. And I just want to emphasize before I move past the New Left Party, this is a massive opportunity. It's a massive opportunity for us to prove how effective our demands are, for us to prove how effective our methods are, right? Especially as we are seeing these kind of very coherent attacks from the right internationally on democracy, and seeing how that is having a massive negative impact on the freedoms to organize as socialists, and understanding that socialists can be the best fighters for democracy This broad left party is a massive opportunity for us to prove that. And I think if we fail to, that is on us and no one else. We can't sit here and blame the tops of Counterfire and the SWP because they're not committed to these politics. We've only got ourselves to blame. We have to reflect on how we're doing it. I'll move on now to looking at what we kind of somewhat reflecting on what we've done as the Marxist Unity Caucus and going, how do you apply that in these smaller groups? When we go into this new left party, there will be the organised left. They will be in there. If you read the various papers, the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, they are all saying they're going to go in. The Communist Party have said you can sign up to the mailing list, but we're not sure if you're going to be allowed to go in yet because Robert Griffiths hasn't decided. But the underlying point is that there will be organised left groups within the broad left party, and we need to have a way of approaching them. What I'd say is if you're in one of those groups, if you're watching this, or if you're in the room and you're in one of those groups, do not leave. Stay and fight. Stay and fight for these politics. And again, fight on the questions of democracy, programme. I think within the sects as well, a real key place to fight is over education. The political education in the British far left is appallingly bad, right? If you are able to show, oh yeah, no, I just want to raise the level of education in the organisation, and you start getting texts like Plekhanov and Kautsky and going through some like proper good bits of Lenin, you can raise these questions in your organisation in a way that will allow you to begin challenging that perhaps a bit more effectively. You will probably have to organise secretly. It will depend on the group you're in, right? So rs21 in our group is, I think I described it in my notes as relatively democratic, politically all over the place, and with a youthful and inexperienced membership. I don't think that's not true of a lot of the left, right? A lot of the left has a lot of it's top heavy, has quite a lot of people that are very stuck in their ways. It's quite difficult to move around in. Communist Party of Britain is one I return to, which is I think it will be very difficult to actually organise anything remotely openly in that organisation because there is this very clear opposition to any kind of oppositional politics within it because it comes out the official communist tradition, and so it's much harder. If you're in a Trotskyist group, it's slightly easier because there's this contradiction in Trotskyism in that whilst they might say you're not allowed to have a faction within our group, Trotsky was a disloyal factionalist of the Communist Party. You know, he gets kicked out of the Communist Party for organising a counter demonstration. You can kind of go like, well, you know, actually, I'm the real Trotskyist because I'm being an oppositional factionalist. So I think there are. It depends on the group, but there are openings. There are places where you can begin organising and advocating for these politics. In terms of in the long run, if you're effective at organising these factions, what you should try to do is change the politics of the group as a whole, try to push them to take better positions, particularly in groups that are a little bit politically inchoate. That's much easier to do. If you're in a harder, more regimented group that has a very clear view of things, then just trying to organise yourselves alone within it would be a good start. And if we get to the point where we are actually trying to found a communist party, those groups could act like the old Communist Unity Group of the Socialist Labour Party did in 1920 and go, well, you know, I'm committed to the project of a communist party. I'm not actually committed to the Socialist Party or the Socialist Workers' Party or Counterfire or whatever. I'm committed to this project and split off. But ultimately, your aim should be to stay and to fight because that is where communists are. That's where a good chunk of them are. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them are. And if you hold these politics, you should stay and fight for them in that organisation. I'm just going to wrap up with what I see as kind of 4 practical things to focus on. So the first of them is independent platforms and publications for debate. So things like the Weekly Worker, Prometheus, Cosmonaut are really useful. Now, you know, we can talk about how effective print publications are in the 21st century, and especially when you're a small group, but the principle of having a place where you can have these debates in public is really useful, and organising those is really effective. And it is also useful if you're in one of these disloyal factions or one of these factions within these groups, because it allows you to present a fait accompli to the leadership if they're not letting public debate happen, because you can go to them and go, okay, well, you can publish our thing, or we'll go and get it published with them. And that's really effective because it means that you are essentially going, look, it's up to you. We don't want to split off. We want to do this thing in-house. We want to do it with you because we believe in this organisation. But if you don't believe in it, that's fine. We'll go and take it somewhere else. And I think those independent platforms are really important for that. It gives you a way to cohere that politics. then I would say, yeah, in this new broad left party, we have to fight for communist politics in it. We have to organise for communist politics in it. Organize, if you're in a sect, organise a faction, start doing it, even if it is you and one friend. It's better than nothing. And then the last one is be in the movement. The major failing, in my view, of the partyist movement in Britain over the last 20 or so years is that it has been totally possible for the rest of the left to totally ignore us. Totally. Like they don't have to engage with our ideas because we don't really represent enough of a force. And we need to change that. We have to be in the movement, whether that's the trade union movement, the anti-fascist movement, the climate movement, international solidarity, running in elections. We have to be there. Because if we're not there, if we're not making that argument is not being made. And so I think that is a really important thing that we have to do. So I think that's pretty much it. And I'll just kind of, round up by saying it's going to take time. And we have to be willing to experiment tactically. If things are not working, we have to reflect on why. And we have to admit that if we're the partyists, then we have to reflect on why partyism isn't working. It is not enough to say, well, the rest of the left don't agree with this.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for that very positive, interesting opening. Kat, over to you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. And yeah, there was a lot that I agree with, definitely. I think originally I'd sort of envisaged this session when we were planning it to be an opportunity to get out in the open, the debates we've been having in Prometheus about being involved in forging communist unity. I certainly think one of the weaknesses of Prometheus during that time was actually that we didn't put out and publish those debates, because that, I think, would have, well, obviously it's a necessary thing to get out in public, those debates, and show in practice that we do have a commitment to that open expression of differences, but also the way that the debate was conducted internally. It was difficult, but it was also really productive in that we were able to get through that kind of difficulty. And I think it was a loss that we didn't do that or prioritise doing that more openly, because I think that kind of practice is in itself an educational experience for others. I think that was a weakness of maybe not prioritising putting that reporting out, because actually it is an extremely important thing to do. So yeah, that's not really what the session has turned out to be. And there's not actually, certainly from the table, I don't think there's going to be a large amount of debate. Maybe the debate will be from the floor instead, because I actually agree with what you've argued. So most of what I'm going to put forward myself, again, kind of continuing from the session that I did on Thursday, is trying to present some critical perspectives, not purposeless criticism, not criticism to, big up one section over another section, but self-criticism of our trend in order that we can develop and push ourselves forward. So it's talking about, the outline of the session. How do we take this project forward? So talking about this project, obviously, is the project of a mass communist party. It's also the project of the partyist trend. How do we take the project that our trend represents forward in this period, and what different ways and approaches might there be involved in that, not necessarily mutually exclusive, but I'll go through those, and obviously Joe's covered a lot of them as well. I thought to kind of begin, it would be helpful to reiterate specifically the work and project of the CPGB. And obviously, I'm not a member of the CPGB. I've been previously. So others from the floor, if I butcher this, please step in and kind of clarify. But my understanding of the way that the CPGB envisages the work towards that project is, first of all, the process of going through the left. So the idea that in order to develop the foundations of a mass communist party, that has to involve our orientation towards the rest of the left. That is where our work is, that's where our priority is, rather than going straight to the class and beginning to build up our trend there. No matter how, you know, when I kind of look at those, the arguments of democracy and what have you, they are, I look at them and I think, okay, these are actually really compelling. Maybe we should just go out and talk to people about them. But when we're thinking about what is the material that allows us to create that kind of basis from which a mass communist party would form, we're talking about orientating towards the rest of the left. We're talking about engaging with those forces, but also the process of political clarification that comes through that engagement, trying to understand the different trends, trying to clarify, but also trying to defeat and overcome tendencies or trends within the movement that are damaging to the prospect of a mass communist party. So opportunism, bureaucratic trends in the movement, that's also part of the process that we're engaged in there. So it's a project of seeking to transform and reconstitute the existing forces of the left into something like a foundation from which a mass communist party would grow. Obviously, once you have that reconstituted basis, there's other objective factors that impact on the ability to develop towards a mass communist party, which David Broder's talk yesterday kind of touched on some of those things, and that can't be ignored, but that's also, I suppose, an additional question to the work that we're talking about. So the way that the CPGB approaches this is primarily through a polemical orientation, through the Weekly Worker, trying to report on, trying to attack damaging trends or tendencies in the movement, and trying to educate forces within the movement to be able to... Sorry?
Sorry.
Okay, to be able to develop those forces. So I think the way that certainly the way that I've heard it described, and I would also agree with myself, is that the purpose is to equip the memberships of the organisations of the left with the tools to be able to challenge their own leaderships. So part of, I suppose, what Joe was describing, if you're in one of the sects or you're in one of these organisations, you stay in and you fight and you develop, whether that might be a factional struggle or whether that might be to educate and develop others around you to challenge your own leadership. So it's trying to equip those different memberships of organisations with the education, the historical understanding, but also the critique of damaging trends in leaderships of those organisations, so that they can be challenged and that they can be overcome. So this is the way that I would understand the project and the work of the CPGB. I do think there's questions around whether this orientation that I've just sort of described in a nutshell, whether that's always understood by other people on the left. If I asked other people on the left to sum up what is the purpose and the project of the CPGB, I don't think many people would be able to identify it in those terms. I think a lot of the way that it's sometimes, misunderstood by people is in the same format as all of the other groups on the left. It's just one attacking another to try and get its own advantage. We've got a session next on culture, where I'll kind of carry on that conversation a little bit, so I'll park it for now. But part of this overall approach ultimately means that the growth of the organisation, the growth of the CPGB in terms of membership, is a secondary question to the analysis of the success of the organisation, because the success of the organisation comes from the ability and the impact it's able to have on the wider left, the way that it's able to have an impression or transform or develop or challenge other sections of the left. So the actual growth of the CPGB itself in terms of membership sits as a secondary question to the project as a whole. And I think as a short point and kind of following some of the stuff we picked up on Thursday, I think sometimes that means that the basic reproduction of the organisation isn't always prioritised, maybe to the level that it needs to be, not because success for the CPGB looks like growing the CPGB until it's the biggest organisation on left. Absolutely not, but prioritising that ability to build the trend itself so that it is able to be impactful and be able to continue to hold the theoretical weight that is required to maintain this trend. And I think, you know, obviously I have kind of put to one side the debates that we had in Prometheus, but that was one of the questions that we tried to deal with. Obviously, there's plenty of criticisms that you can lay at the door of the CPGB. It's not been able to grow, etc. But at the same time, I don't think we should, in the process, kind of junk the importance that it holds for us in the theoretical leadership and the historical education that it's been able to provide to a lot of us, including the Marxist Unity Group, who have taken the lead and the knowledge and the kind of orientation and understanding from that theoretical leadership. So I think it's important, whatever we envisage as the way to take the project forward, that we don't underplay that, because, and I'll go into it kind of as I go along, but the New Left formation presents to us an incredible opportunity, but it also presents to us challenges, the challenges of becoming lost in that organisation, becoming, if you join your local group, especially if you're in a small town, you're gonna feel the enthusiasm of those around you, which is a really positive thing, but it's also easy to get sucked up into that and to lose your grounding and your orientation through that. And so I think we cannot underplay the importance of that, whether that looks like us really putting in the work to develop and build that ourselves, or finding some way to cohere our forces together so that we can maintain and reproduce that within the CPGB. So yeah, there is that question of the reproduction of the organisation that I think ends up getting sidelined because it's not the measure of the success of the organisation. But it also means that it becomes more difficult sometimes to measure and evaluate the success or effectiveness of the approach of the CPGB, because it's a more sort of opaque thing. We're putting out these ideas, we're making these kind of interventions and engagements, but how do we work out when we consider something to have been successful, when we consider that this project is growing? I mean, for example, internationally, we can see, okay, I would say that there's a credible success. Those ideas have spread and took root. The Marxist Unity Caucus is an example of that success too. And I think sometimes it's hard to be able to identify, and it's hard to work out what went right or what went wrong in different things, because we can't kind of clearly grasp that this was a product of this particular approach and this particular intervention, which means that there is, as a result, I think, a danger of falling into a kind of default setting approach, because we don't have a clear way of measuring success, measuring the effectiveness. You fall easily, or there's a danger of falling easily into a default setting. And I think some of that stuff on culture, and as I say, I'll go into it, but I think, the point that Alex raised on Thursday, that question of political effectiveness in our approach. So it's not talking about a blanket approach. We never do this, or we never do that, or we always do this, or we always do that. It's trying to work out political effectiveness, political sense in our approach. And admittedly, it's difficult to do that and to work out how to do that. We don't have that clear measure of our success. And I'm not putting that forward as a criticism, just more of an observation of a challenge involved in that approach. How am I doing on time?
10 minutes.
Oh, right, cool. So I think just placing that sort of context and then trying to think within that and within the trend as a whole about what different ways we can see of taking the project forward, what our work might look like in trying to advance and trying to build and trying to spread the project that we're arguing for. And now these things are not mutually exclusive. A lot of the time, actually, they're dependent on each other. I think first of all is polemic through the paper or through other types of media, and that is a foundational thing within the approach. Without that, everything else becomes kind of unmoored through that process. But it is also itself dependent on, and I absolutely agree with what kind of Joe finished on, is being in the movement. And that's something that I am sort of repeating a lot of the things that I put in my letters a couple of years ago on these points of strategy. But being in the movement, and I think it was critiqued as bacooninist, and I don't object to being called bacooninist, I just rather it was appropriately applied, that's all. The argument that I was making was not that we ditch that and we go just agitate for strikes, etc. No, it's a description of what makes it effective to have a polemical intervention through a paper. If you're in the movement, first of all, you're informed about what's going on in the wider left. So the example of Harry's article in Prometheus about the network left is a product of having a grounding in the movement, really being able to understand the trends and the developments and the challenges or the dangers that might be developing. It gives you that very clearly informed perspective. It's necessary to be able to produce effective polemic in the first place, but it also makes our polemic have grounding and purchase with others. If you read the Weekly Worker, but you've never encountered anybody from the CPG, but you've never really engaged with anybody, it makes it very difficult for you as a person to be able to engage with those ideas if they're extremely critical to what, if you're a SWP member, for example, it's very easy to pick it up and think, oh, they just hate the they just hate the SWP, never mind. But if you're in the movement with people and you're having these conversations and they trust you and they understand what you're saying, it gives it strength, it gives it purchase. And that was the argument that I was trying to make when I said that it's important to be in the movement. It gives polemic life and it gives it informed credibility. But yeah, that is polemic through the paper is a foundation of our approach, but is also not enough. It's not sufficient to be able to take the project forward. There's also small-scale regroupment of Perseus forces. We've already done the post-mortem of the SCU, so I'll put that one to one side. And obviously I was extremely negative on Thursday in talking about this, but kind of for this talk, I was rereading the 1998 rapprochement thesis from the CPGB, and the way that is talked about and the way that it's laid out. Thank you, Dina. The way that it's talked about and the way that it's laid out, the process of small-scale initial regroupment, rapprochement of a partyist trend, it might be establishing comradely relations, it might be some joint work, it might be some common work together. The FCU process put a lot of hard work and effort into it, others put a lot of hard work and effort into it too, and gutting that it hasn't worked out, but it doesn't mean the end of this kind of work. It means learning lessons from that experience and trying to look at what rapprochement or what regroupment might look like for us if it doesn't look like that. But obviously that is a significant thing in building and strengthening our trend. There's also work, as Marxist Unity Caucus are doing, work within bigger revolutionary organisations. And I think the work that Marxist Unity Caucus have been doing, to me, is really impressive. I think that the comrades have been able to really build a strong, coherent intervention in rs21, and to do it in a way that, at least from the outside, appears to be respected and well considered by others in the organisation. As described, those arguments around democracy, I don't know if this is inaccurate, maybe.
Just the idea of all these other comrades going, oh, it's really great. What you're doing. I was a little bit sceptical myself, and I heard laughter.
But I completely agree, and this is my experience too. The arguments around democracy, around programme, they are convincing to people. When you put them forward and put them forward well, they are convincing to people. They make a lot of sense. And I think that the grounds to win people over, that does exist. It requires trust, it requires engagement, but that opportunity does exist. This is speaking from the outside, and maybe others might be able to comment on it more from the Marxist Unity Caucus, but my impression is that ground or winning people over to arguments around democracy, programme, etc. has been more winnable, but maybe arguments around regroupment and orientation towards others on the left has been more difficult to make ground on. And I think maybe that's one of the challenges to consider about how to approach that, because it isn't a side issue to the project. It is a fundamental aspect of our project. And I think, maybe others might be able to comment more on that. But I think an important part of what Marxist Unity Caucus have been doing is that element of showing in practice that these things are convincing, that these things work, that we can put forward these arguments in ways that are going to be winnable with others. And then finally is working within a broad left formation, which obviously is coming together now, and that does represent an extremely significant opportunity, because the rest of the left are going to be there. We're going to have that opportunity to be working with people, discussing with people, organising with people, and that represents a really significant opportunity for us to be able to put forward our arguments, to engage with others, to be able to get an understanding of where different groups are at. I think the proposal from the Marxist Unity Caucus for a communist caucus within the new left formation, that sounds like a really great idea to me, and I would definitely want to participate in that and want to be involved in that. I'm not sure on the exact nature of if it be open to.
Neither am I, but
Right.
we'll figure it out. But I could, I would want it to be.
Yeah. So I think my understanding is that you guys have proposed it within rs21. Yeah. Obviously that would represent again an opportunity for coherence of our forces, common work, and I guess not to kind of go over everything with FCU again, but that common work element was completely missing from it, and I think that did weaken the process overall, as we talked about. But as I've touched on already, things with the broad left formation, the coming new party is a massive opportunity, but it also, and it's not to put a negative spin on it, but it contains challenges and it contains dangers for us also, in the dynamics towards opportunism, the dynamics towards going native, or whatever you want to call it. And it comes from a good place. It's, of course, you would be enthusiastic and, you know, engage with those around you that you're working on. And, you know, after such a period of nothing going on, yeah, of course, but it represents a clear pressure and a pressure on us and on our trend. And it is therefore extremely important as well to build into our intervention a clear kind of grounding, emphasis on education, emphasis on coherence, to be able to coordinate and kind of keep each other together in that.
Go on,
I said I was going to speak for 10 minutes. Yeah, sorry, I'll just try to finish up as quickly as possible then. So obviously laid out different approaches, but what I think is extremely necessary for our trend, I don't want to, you know, tell the CPG what to do because I'm not a member, but having an active strategy about how to take the project forward. So reading the 1998 rapprochement thesis, it lays out an analysis of existing forces on the left and were they grouped together and what that means. It lays out stages of what rapprochement might look like, and clarifies what we mean by that. And it talks about that small scale coming together and then active engagement with other organisations. And I'm not saying reproduce that thesis, but have something that can provide strategic leadership. I think, you know, from my, and as I've said to others, I do see the CPGB as playing theoretical leadership over our trend, but the question of strategic leadership is being sought elsewhere, and that's not necessarily a problem, but it means that we, you know, we're sometimes maybe pulling in different directions to each other. And I think for me, the priority of laying out a strategy is quite high, and that's something that, you know, me and I actually both kind of emphasised in the FCU process, that we thought from the very start it would be an extremely important thing to be talking about that, to be laying out what our work would look like practically and how we would understand that work as being you know, not overly prescriptive, but at least laying out a path of how we saw that working towards the project of a mass communist party. Yeah, as I said, developing this strategy, as we've talked about already, it needs to be an informed assessment of the existing forces, what they represent, what's meaningful, what's not, and that means that engagement with others on the left, that means being in the movement to be able to make that in any informed way. So I'll just conclude much more positively than Thursday. You know, putting aside the things with the FCU, which is obviously extremely disappointing. But if I think about, you know, for myself being in the CPGB 15 years ago, the prospects for partyism and the arguments, you know, around a mass communist party, around democratic organising, a lot of the time I just felt like people had no idea what we were talking about and didn't really relate in any way to those arguments. And that feels very different to me now. Not only are there other trends, not only is there things developing with the Marxist Unity Caucus, but anyone that I'm talking to on the left has some kind of general understanding that this exists as a tendency, this exists as a trend on the left, that there is people who are putting forward these arguments for a mass communist party who want to engage with others on the left to push that forward. It's much more meaningful when I have those conversations with people. So I do feel like there is a change. I do feel like there is a positive change. I do feel like there is an opportunity. And I think, obviously, it just, the emphasis is on developing a clear strategy. The emphasis is on cohering our forces into some kind of common work. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.